Hello everyone. Welcome to the third talk of this spectacular. I hope you had some interesting first two talks today. AI is the topic of the year. Actually, we all know it's a topic since many, many years, but at least this year everybody should have noted that it's very important for our life, especially in our sector. And I'm very happy that we have two guests here today who will look at or tell us about AI from a little bit different perspective, actually from two perspectives. So the first one is Mr. Antoine Leboyer. He is the managing director of the TUM Venture Lab for Software and Artificial Intelligence. This is, as the name says, it is a TUM organization which fosters promising new and innovative AI startups and ideas by providing them not only education, but also infrastructure and networking. And then we have a second guest today, who is a very good representative of how important and successful this networking can be. Mr. Michael Spira. He is the co-founder and CEO of a freshly founded startup called the DataQ company. And they have developed products which help companies in improving their data quality processes, making heavily use of AI approaches. I don't want to spend too many more words because they obviously can talk much more interestingly about what their work is about than I can do. Just one last remark. You should maybe know this after two talks, but we have a Slack channel for this room, the Kohle Bunker 2. So if you are participating remotely in this talk, please feel free to post some questions there, and we will have time for a Q&A session after the talk. And with that, I will hand over.
Thank you. I hope you guys can hear me well. Okay, good. Always good to check. Can I ask how many of you have studied at TUM? Cool, I feel exactly like in my family. Look, I have arrived at TUM at the Venture Lab a couple of years ago, and I will describe what we do, and then Michael will actually illustrate this more precisely by explaining what he does. But one thing that I've seen when I've been talking to people from the industry, people from large organizations, people from the government, is that when you talk to them about AI startup, they talk to you about companies which are in the US. They talk to you about companies which are not startup but already far beyond the startup or even the scale-up level. And my objective is a bit to explain what we do, what are the startups which are actually in Munich, and give you an example of how to engage with them. Yesterday, I was actually at another conference where I was hosting a panel. Who knows what stable diffusion is? Okay, do you know who started do you know in which city stable diffusion was started? Yes, so this is, thank you very much. Let me rephrase it for people who couldn't hear it. So stable diffusion was not started in Silicon Valley, was not started in London, was not started in New York or Boston. It was started at LMU in Munich by Björn Ömer. And when I describe this, I don't know how many of you were aware of this, but this is actually pretty typical of the perception that exists right now in Germany, in Europe, in Munich, in Bavaria, in Germany, in Europe as a whole. I think that there's a sort of underestimation of the quality of the startup which exists. And this is why I'm glad that I got the ability to be able to convince you otherwise right now. So I have joined an organization which is called the Venture Lab, which is an organization which is looking at which will be the domain which will foster a new startup. So these are all the domains which we have identified right now. You have things which could be on chemical with new compound. You've got an unbelievable amount of quantum technology. I'm unbelievably impressed because we both have companies in quantum sensing as well as quantum technologies. There's a huge amount of robotics. I've looked, by the way, there are a couple of robotics startups that you can see. We've got quite a lot which are also unbelievable. And we also have something which is, the Ministry of Justice in Bavaria founded one venture lab just to help legal startup. And if you know this domain, there was actually last week in the US one of the largest M&A transactions just on this domain on the legal startup. Software which I run is probably the biggest one because software is everywhere, and we have startup of unbelievable type of capabilities. Now, what we do is that we usually look at the way the students start, and this is something which I've a little bit cleaned, but these describe what happens if you are a student and you want to start a startup. So usually what we have is that we have at the beginning a number of activities to what we do inspire students. Okay, we have got classes, we've got hackathon. There was a presentation on prompt engineering, which was the first presentation in the hall over there. 2 years and a half, when I arrived for the first time at the Venture Lab, there was actually a hackathon where OpenAI API were being used, and there was the first time we had some guys working on automatic code generation. So, a lot of people have discovered the ability to do and use these models. 2 years and a half ago, already, there were a number of guys working on this sort of technology. And it shows the technical level that is of the student which arrive. And then usually what happens is that, if you are inspired, then basically you want to try. And I wish I could find a better way of describing what startups do, but they just find an idea and try, okay? And that's the way most of us we do. I used to run, I crushed 3 startups. I ran the 4th one during 13 years. You don't make a committee to try to find a big domain. Usually you'll find an idea and then you try and you do these multiple little modification, which is called pivoting. We also insist very much that you have to look for co-founders. I remember you need 3 people to do a startup. Michael, when you came to see me, actually there were already three groups, 3 people, and the 3 type of capabilities which were there. And university is really great because this is where you can actually find co-founders. And then what happens is that after you try, usually you make a decision. Now, I'm probably older than the student, and when I was leaving my university, people told you go into large companies and then you try to learn as much as you can, and then you go into smaller places, smaller companies, and so on. 15 years ago, people would tell you go at McKinsey and BCG. Where do you come from? BCG. BCG, thank you very much. But nowadays, if you really want to do something, you go into a startup, and somehow when I say you decide for launching a startup, it's something which is much more the cool stuff, okay? And this is what happens. And then if you decide to do this is particularly if you're in software, where you're going to go to what I call this long and difficult, by the way, phase has disappeared, so I don't know why this is there. But you try to move to a situation where you try to get some form of validation, to a situation where you can say, I've done enough modification, enough pivoting, that I know that I got something for which there's enough value for people, and people can actually give me some money, and we can make a business out of this, okay? And there's no real way of trying to formalize this apart from the fact that you need to start working with a couple of guys, try something, get a feedback, modify this until the guys are ready to say, okay, this is a value, this is what we do. If you're in healthcare, it's very different. If you're in chemical, it's very different. You work during 3 to 5 years in a lab with the objective of passing a number of specific goals and validation from various agencies. This is not what we do in software. This is why, in the beginning, working with early adopters, people who are early adopters, looking at new technology, is very important. Now, the other thing that I want to say is that when you are here, usually you go direct. And I want to mention this because I know that many of you are from TNG. So usually, Michael and many of the others, when they started, they actually went direct. They didn't work with third parties. And this is because they need to be able to do many more modifications. As you start moving this, then this is where the fact of working with other organizations becomes unbelievably important, because this is why large customers, especially in the B2B sector that you guys are busy in, they are not going to ask you to work on all technology, because that's commodity. What we do what the startup that we are working with, they do is not at all a commodity. It's very advanced and high tech. And the people that work with you, if they knock at your door, that's because they want to get your expertise in managing something which is not a commodity technology. So this is why when they go through this phase, usually they are direct, but at this phase, working with companies like you like TNG, is becoming unbelievably important. It's part of the way for them to expand. Now, one other thing also which I have to explain at the university is that the innovator is not the guy who does the value and the research. And this is something which I've had to explain a few times, so give me a few minutes. If you do some research, if you are, don't know how many of you have done master theses or PhDs and so on, I'm looking to ask, I don't have a PhD, okay? But if you do something like this, you have the ability to work on something to improve state of the art. The guy who is the innovator is the guy who sees the value of the research. And it is rarely the guy who does the research. And the best example that we all know was Steve Jobs, who went to visit the Xerox PARC. I guess you all know the story? Okay, I can see a lot of faces. So this is the archetypal innovator who saw the value that was done by others people research. Okay, and then entrepreneurship is making a business out of it. And I have is partly in a university environment to explain these things. And it's also, by the way, matches why you need multiple co-founders, not a single founders when you're into a startup. Now, let me give you a sense of the breadth of startup that we have right now at the university. I made a presentation a couple of months ago to the community of the CMO in Germany. And I had 40 people in front of me, which basically were, the 40 largest capitalization in Germany. And I asked how many were aware that in their company there were a number of startups which were less than 5-6 years old in production. And of course, no one raised their hands. And after 10 minutes, half of them raised their hand because of the quality of the startup that we have. So we basically have got 3 domains where the startups are busy. I'll come to AI because this is the one that we want to discuss a little bit at the end. But first, we have a number of startups which are active in the Web3. They are not active in cryptocurrency or NFT, which is probably something of the past or another domain. But what they are doing is that they come with a specific type of challenge and problem which requires decentralized and a smart contract application. So to give an example, Point 12 which has just finished funding, they started by having quite a lot of analysis and capabilities on how you define green hydrogen, and you put in place a certification process. Now, of course, it's all Web3 underlying, but Web3 is not the example, the core value of the startup. The startup is that this is a sustainability startup which uses Web3. We got a number of them, which I would encourage you to have a look. We probably then have quite a lot which are in classic IT with system management, cybersecurity platform. Stack Guardian is a startup that we worked with a year and a half ago. This is probably the one which raised the biggest amount of funding last year. And this is one where the founder was someone who 5 years ago was not German, probably arrived with half of a passport from whichever country, and he raised the biggest amount of funding of all the startups that I worked with last year. Now, of course, AI is of course the biggest provider these days of activities and so on. So we usually distinguish for 3 types of AI: core AI, focused app, and generative AI. So let me give you an example on what these guys do. So Fast AI Movie is a startup which has developed their own LLM to take specific bullet point and make e-learning, automatic e-learning video. I mention this because the founder is 19 years old. He started his startup 2 years ago. He's got 10 people working for him. The average size of an AI startup is 3 people, so he's got 3 times the size of an average startup, and he's got 9 paying customers. Okay? And every time I see him, I feel very, very old. I'm very impressed with what he's doing. ZUM is another very interesting startup. What they've done is that they have developed, again, their own LLM to take complex technical text and make them and translate them into easy language. So if you go and you take the train in Germany, all the service team of Deutsche Bahn is actually using systems which have been developed by them to be able to understand how they need to do the maintenance of all the systems. It's amazing technology. There's nothing to do with what Google or Facebook or OpenAI are doing. It's all their technology. The value that they've done is really working on complex technical text. And they started 3 years ago, okay? And this is quite remarkable. We got quite a number which are working on specifically focused application. And I think that what it reflects is that AI is going to be everywhere. So this is a healthcare application, and they have an application which has been deployed in partnership with Fielmann. So if you got glasses and Fielmann offers, you go and get your glasses renewed. If you have someone who offers you the ability to do a quick eye analysis, then this is their system which is behind there. It's a remarkable company. Sidekick is interesting because it's a company which has raised funding not from a classic VC, but from the local Mittelstand incumbent company, which wanted to deploy themselves AI. And I spoke with them. They actually founded the company because they wanted to be able to get some type of, startup-ish feeling. They felt that they wouldn't be able to hire people which would go at the right speed, but also more importantly, Sidekick is actually not only getting funding from them, but they're also getting the data. So Sidekick is training their model on the data of the company which is financing them. And I think that this is a model for Germany and Mittelstand companies. I'm looking at the time. I'm late. And then we have core AI, so not vertical solution, but vertical ones. This one is just moved to the US and has, after raising 1.7, and they got the ability to train million data set on label-less system, and I will let Michael explain what he does. But if we look at a couple of things, so what we do is that we spend time to inspire entrepreneurs. By the way, we received Sam Altman a month ago. I didn't know I was going to be sitting next to him, okay, but I'd like the picture anyway. We've tried to do an unbelievable amount of communication, because the value that we got to be delivering is not only on the support, it's on make sure that we can knock at people, at the doors of people like you and make these startups work together. So we are regularly trying to get our startup when we believe that they have the right content in front of you guys. And then let me just finish with a couple of numbers. So on the whole of last year. So if you go to the database of the startup at the university, there's 192 startups. Okay, there's 192 startups. I have 1 or 2 new guys reaching me every week. It shows you, what's happening. In Germany, one of the great ways that startup can get funding is via these stipend from the federal government called Exist Forschung Transfer. I think you got it. Okay, so these are the cool guys who get it. TUM with software AI, we are the largest university which got the biggest amount of Exist. We got 20 plus which got Exist funding. We got 3 startups which are already cash positive. Having run a company, these are the one that I like the most. The combined amount of funding for first-time founders was €6 million. in 2022. We are going to go in the summer break of 2023 with more than this amount already being raised by first-time founders. And we have two exits which were worth 7 and 8 figures already with teams that were 3 to 4 years old. And let me tell you, this is something that we start looking. There's probably 20 startups which are already working at your clients. They are in production with your clients. So it's great to work with Microsoft, it's great to work with Google, nothing wrong with these guys, but you have next door to you and on your old alma mater, startup which would love to work with you guys, and this is why I would like to show you an example of such a startup to make you come at the university and work with us. So Michael, you're next, an example, a typical startup.
Thanks so much. Hi everyone, and many thanks for the invitation to give you a bit of an overview of what DQC is doing, and then looking forward to the discussion of the topic. So myself, I'm Michael, one of the 3 co-founders of the DataQ company, and the 3 of us, we actually worked in the industry combined for 25 years. And the idea for launching data quality, so the Q stands for quality, for launching this kind of company really came from many discussions with various enterprise customers, but also mid-sized companies. Because we really saw, okay, data quality as a topic, it's broken. It doesn't work. Like everyone is complaining about data quality. And the solutions that are out there, well, we weren't convinced by them. And that was like the starting point where we, in 2021, started to discuss, okay, what would actually an ideal solution in this space look like? And then we decided in 2021 to launch our own company, so leave the safe harbor and basically starting our own shop. And the first thing we did is, well, we had some good contacts in the enterprise space, but we weren't really well connected to the startups. So we knew like a couple of maybe successful founders of unicorn startups or other startups, but we weren't really connected to like the basic problems that you face as a young startup in Germany, which is like stuff such as setting up a GmbH, writing your first contract to employ someone, paying someone the right amount at the right time, and making sure that the Finanzamt also gets their share. We didn't know anything of how to do that kind of stuff. So therefore, like, we decided to join Unternehmertum, and quickly then found Antoine and also joined the Venture Lab for Software and AI, and also joined the accelerator of Expreneurs, because that way, like, on the one hand, we were able to really find many other co-founders who had stumbled over the same kind of problems as we did, but also get a lot of guidance, meet potential customers, and in this way benefit from this great ecosystem that we have here in Munich. Then a bit about ourselves, what you should keep in mind. We, in comparison to many other software startups, decided to bootstrap at the beginning. And this is a bit like most startups that you read about in the newspapers. You see these great announcements, such as, for instance, the French startup that just raised their, I don't know what to call it, early stage funding round of 100 million, and were valued at 250 million, and this was like their first round. That's the kind of stuff that makes it into the newspapers. Bootstrapping in the media is not so sexy. We decided nonetheless to do that, and for us it's a bit like if you put yourself on a diet. It doesn't feel great, but when you go like through a longer period of time, at the end of the time you know it's worthwhile, because you focus much more on what you are doing and what kind of food you are eating. And that's also for how we basically go about developing our software, because we very much need to develop software that generates value for our customers early on. Otherwise, they wouldn't be paying, and we would go bankrupt. So for us, we consciously decided, okay, let's bootstrap at the beginning. We won a couple of innovation grants in Germany, which was great, but at the end of the day, only revenue is financing our business. And this makes it really worthwhile. Now, we are like roughly 10 people. We have more than 20 corporate clients, and as Antoine mentioned, like many of these clients are probably also your clients. So we have like some, for instance, OEMs with more than 100,000 employees who have decided to work with us, players from the energy sector, but also like some mid-sized companies as well. And then a lot of times these days, people ask us, okay, so you are a startup for data quality. Was that like a smart decision to start in data quality? Shouldn't you also have launched like a Gen AI startup? And there we say, well, the current hype around generative AI, there is some positive for us, but there are also some downsides that we see. So the good thing about it is the topic of AI and of data is getting much more attention these days, be it in the media, but also be it within companies that we try to work with or that we already work with. The bad thing is everyone is jumping to, okay, I want to also deploy this and generate value with like a Gen AI solution. And the risk there is really that people don't do their homework beforehand. And what is the homework? Well, the old problem of shit in, shit out. So if you feed a Gen AI model with poor data, you will generate a lot of content out of this, which is also very poor. And for that reason, we say, well, it's a double-edged sword, the hype around Gen AI. On the one hand, it helps us. On the other hand, it also takes away a lot of attention, for instance, from boards, from CIOs, CTOs with whom we work, because they try to really, well, start running before they can actually walk. And walking is making sure that you have clean data. Now, this is a problem for companies, having clean data. And actually, there's not a single industry and there's not a single function where data quality is not important. So for instance, one of our clients, they have like more than 100,000 employees, and they did an internal happiness survey on data. 99% of respondents said that data is important for the future success of the company. 87% of respondents said that data plays a crucial role in their daily work. And 21% of respondents said that they have reliable data for their daily work. There's a huge discrepancy between the data that people need and how they trust the data and whether they can access reliable data. And that's exactly our playing field. Now, what is the problem? Like, why don't companies have better data? Typically, it's a bit like you have like a small team, for instance, a data team that is trying to fix everything that the rest of the organization has broken. And that's not fair, because the data team is typically like 1% of employees, and they are fighting against the 99%, and they are losing that battle. And this is costing companies real money. So a couple of examples, or maybe one example. One of our clients was actually selling their products for €0. They had like a pricing engine, which made total sense, and the problem was that the exchange rate with which it was multiplying the prices was set to 0. So customers were able to order products from this company for €0. And this was not like for a couple of days or weeks, but they were selling for months for €0, and no one was realizing this. And yeah, this is expensive if you do this kind of stuff. So you're losing not only top line, also due to inefficiencies, trying to look for the correct data, you're also losing a lot of, or you're also having like a lot of unnecessary costs. And when you ask companies, okay, why are you failing at data quality? It's exactly this problem of 1% trying to fix what 99% of the organization or of the rest of the organization breaks actually. And this is like where we then come in. I'm not sure if any of you have ever like looked at a data quality solution, such as, for instance, from Informatica or so. Anyone? It's not very much fun. Like these kind of solutions, when you look at them, they are really hard to use. And typically, like you need some training in order to make sense of them. It's not like what your standard person that works in the business actually likes to do or actually is able to do. So it's very manual to work with these tools, and you need some expert knowledge in order to make use of them. And this is like what we saw, and we also saw that those kind of vendors are making very good margins. So we observed, okay, on the one hand, you have a solution which is not very good. On the other hand, you have like a very big market which is very profitable. So that's exactly like the typical, your margin is our opportunity, and that's why we decided, okay, let's try to disrupt that market, or let's try to at least get a share of that cake. And what is our share of the cake? Well, we make it really easy to identify data problems. How do we make it easy? Well, we have, at the end of the day, like smart algorithms in the background, but then we make them easily accessible for people and accessible to use them so that anyone can use them. It's a bit like driving a car. Like, not everyone knows how to build the engine, but everyone can drive one. And that's also like our expectation or our goal, to develop software that anyone can use without really knowing like how to do anomaly detection. But at least the software tells you like there's something wrong with your data before you sell, for instance, items for €0. Now, our solution, and without going too much into detail, it's connecting to the data sources of companies, so for instance, to the data warehouse, to databases, but then you can also import, for instance, CSV files, JSON files, or Parquet files, because for many companies, they are receiving these kind of files, for instance, from their suppliers or from their customers. And then our solution connects to these data sources. Shouldn't have clicked on that. Ooh, fancy. Okay. We connect to this, and then at the end of the day, we take the data and we infer from the data the patterns. Like, how do you expect that a column behaves? What kind of data do you expect in this column? And then we show where patterns are broken, and we say, this is an anomaly, someone should look at this. That's what we do. Then it's also possible for the business to say, I would expect that in this column or in this table, the data behaves in the following way. And yes, there we are also making use of large language models. But the main part is really you can just throw data at our models, and we will tell you and deduct rules from this. And then say you, okay, or tell you like, okay, here you have violations. So it's easy to use, and then we show you, for instance, at the end of the day, your data scores as a B-. Do you want an A score? Then you need to fix the following problems. And then we try to complement existing tools. There are already like many companies that are using, for instance, DBT tests, Great Expectations, and so on and so forth. And then we try to translate our rules that we identify into these kind of programs so that they can then basically be reused over there as well. And then we make the data quality scores available into, for instance, data catalogs, for instance, into BI tools, but then also into communication, so that, for instance, the business is informed and receives a message, hey, we observed that you are starting to sell you're starting to sell products at €0. Are you sure you want to continue doing this? And not like getting this kind of information at the end of the month when your sales report shows you in Tableau or Power BI that you're missing your targets, but actually getting that information as soon as it hits the source system. Because then we can inform business and they can react to it. So on the one hand, our tool provides some productivity gain, and on the other side, it also generates business value for the companies using it. Then I think I covered like most of these parts. We could go into more details, but in the interest of time and also to leave a bit of time for the discussion, just to say, like our tools are always like no code, low code. They are smart in the background, but that's a bit like the car example of how we try to do it. And then they also meet business people where they work. So this can be in the Excel tool, this can be in Power BI or Tableau, and this can also be in Slack, in Teams, or in good old Outlook. And then when you set this up the right way, if you think about it, that should give us the power to also learn from such interactions with the business people. So what we do on the left-hand side, this is what I showed you so far. Like we are detecting patterns and anomalies in the patterns. And then we are starting to involve people and have them react to the kind of anomalies that we have identified. And from the reactions from the business side, we can again learn. So basically, we are developing a feedback loop so that we identify, look, we observe here an anomaly. The business person tells us, oh, that's a big problem. Then we know, okay, there's some reinforcement for this. This receives a higher weight in our models. So basically, we make sure that this rule stays active. If a business person gives us the feedback, for instance, in MS Teams, ignore because not relevant, or this is like this is an exception to the rule, and the rule should be basically allowing these kind of exceptions, then again, we update our models. So it's trying to learn from these interactions that we have with the business folks. And that's a completely different approach compared to how current companies in this space actually behave, because they very much stay within the data and the IT teams. And from there are various kind of use cases. So you can use our solutions to clean up systems. For instance, when you do system migrations, when you do system transformations. So we have some clients that use it for Salesforce or SAP projects that they want to clean the data before ingesting it. Also, it's a very neat solution to do master data cleanups. No one wants to do master data cleanups, but everyone has to do them at some point. And then also for transactional data. So observing, for instance, in the sales department, but also in the operations teams, the kind of data, the kind of business data that's being generated and seeing where things go south, and then being able to react quickly. And then the last part, and this is something where essentially all companies that we talk to struggle when they receive external data, because you can't trust this. Like there might be a schema change, there might be like a variable defined in a new way, like, and you're not informed about these kind of changes. And therefore, like, if you are relying on external data, and every company is relying on external data, then this is also like a nice use case for us. And then I think I already mentioned the team that we are having. So for us, it was really important to join the TUM network for a couple of reasons. Like it helped us to connect with other co-founders. It also helped us very much to pivot on the idea. So the idea we initially started on, well, it's not really what we have built in the end, and it's not really what we have sold now or are selling to our clients. So I would say like 2/3 of the idea has changed compared to what we have put on paper like 2 years ago. And then the benefits of companies that are using our solution, well, they have better data, and hopefully they are using our solution in an area where it actually creates value for them. So this can be in the sales area, this can be, for instance, in the operations teams, it can also be in the support functions. And that way then can save time, they can save money or make more money, and in particular engage everyone in trying to contribute to data quality. And our interest is, of course, like to engage in discussions, because we are by no means done with the kind of product we are developing. So we are always seeking like input from the kind of things that you have seen, the kind of things that you perceive as problems in the data space. But then, of course, also we are super happy if there are people that say, yeah, I want to try out this kind of solution. Because for us as an AI startup, at the beginning, the hardest part has always been you need people to make a leap of faith. Because you are not the Microsoft, you are not the Google that is coming to a large corporation. So yeah, we are partnering with Microsoft, so we can use their logo and everything. But still, it's completely different, and there's the good saying, such as, like, no one ever got fired for buying IBM, no one ever got fired for buying SAP. And maybe you get fired for buying DQC. I hope not. So you need people that take that leap of faith, and that say, okay, I'm open to work with an innovative startup. It has its pros and cons. So when you ask them for certain, for instance, ISO certificates, they might say, this is still pending. It is still pending, that process. It's a pain. But on the other hand, they do things that don't scale. So when our clients actually call us like on a Friday afternoon and say, okay, we had discussed the following feature and we really need this until mid next week, like we will find a way to make that happen in one way or the other way, so that at the end of the day for the client, they get the result that they are expecting. If you try to call SAP on a Friday afternoon, well, they might not even answer the phone. So it's a bit this doing things that don't scale. I mean, for us, it's sometimes really tiring, but on the other hand, like that way, we are really creating products and solutions that no one else is creating out there. And I think that is something that we can offer as well. And therefore, like, we just look forward to engaging in discussions and hearing your thoughts about it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Antoine. Thank you, Michael, for this interesting talk. Do we have some questions here in the audience? Yes.
Hello? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you both very much for the interesting talk. I have a question for you, if you don't mind. I assume you've been in contact with a lot of startups, given your TU Munich thing. So I was wondering, do you have maybe some top recommendations you'd give to new startups that are just beginning their journey? Or what have you maybe observed that stopped a lot of startups from becoming successful? What's your advice?
So I do meet a lot of startups. I actually run a few of them as well. But I think that usually, particularly for startups or university, domain knowledge is really important because everyone that I talk to, they have unbelievable technical skills. Of course, you cannot have domain knowledge from day one, and ramping up domain knowledge is really important. Which leads me to the second thing, which is that good startups are unbelievably flexible, open to ideas. They listen very much to what's happening, and I think this is something that I can really see in the startup. And then the third thing which I said is, find co-founders. Don't do this alone. And in software, the Silicon Valley joke is that you need 3 people to do a startup: the nerd, the designer, the hustler. So someone that can code, someone that can read market and understand how to translate what people are saying into features and what's important, what's not important. I think product management type of capabilities, and someone that has the ability to be able to get funding, get contract signed. So it's really important. These are the 3 things which I would definitely. And maybe another one, don't worry if you fail, because failure is how startups grow, and this is, well, he hasn't failed, okay, so I should not say this, but this is this. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would fully agree with that. And I think just putting yourself out there, trying to do something, because a lot of times, in particular, I think in Germany, people say oh, I have to protect this great idea. And the typical saying is an idea is worth nothing, because there are so many great ideas, there are so many people with great ideas, and there are very few people who actually do something. So you can differentiate yourself from 99% if you just start doing something.
Or maybe in one last advice, come and see the Venture Lab, okay?
Thank you.
Thanks. So there are many great use cases for generative AI, but from my personal opinion, it seems a bit overhyped, or at least some people expect things of it which it might not be able to fulfill. First of all, do you agree with that? And do you think that if there is some kind of hype around it, some bubble, that it might burst at some point? Might be completely wrong too, so. Yeah.
Look, so what happens with generative AI is the following. So it existed for 2 or 3 years ago already, as we discussed already. And then what happens is that someone by accident actually put a generative AI application available for everyone, and this is ChatGPT, which I assume that we've all been using regularly. And if you compare this to some of the big technological transformation, the mobile, the internet, and whatever, everyone can use this. Everyone can actually go to the website, write a question, and get an answer from unbelievable technology. So this is why you've had this unbelievable amount of ramp-up, which in 2 weeks they got 100 million users, which means, by the way, that in 2 weeks they got 100 million users doing reinforcement learning by human feedback for reinforced learning. And this is why right now everyone is looking at something like this. If you wanted to deploy a mobile application, you needed a phone and specific application. This one you just need a browser for something which is unbelievably strong. So this is why currently you got something which is everyone understands what's generative AI. The core raw demand for generative AI, thanks to this experiment which was ChatGPT, has made that everyone knows about this. And right now you have an unbelievable amount of the sort of second phase. You got a number of focused large language model activities actually, and these are actually delivering a lot of value. So I feel that by comparison with some other new technologies, you got this sort of combination of this perfect storm where you have everyone now understand what generative AI. Whereas if you wanted to go several years and you say, we're going to help you build an e-commerce, or you're going to do, a web server, people wouldn't necessarily understand these the way everyone understands these. And nowadays, if you come and says, this is how you can develop specific use case, work on quality data, which you need to clean up, you can get something which has a lot of value. So, no, I'm quite bullish on generative AI, and the startup that we have are really good. You had another question, by the way. You had two questions.
Maybe just to add one sentence to that. Like, my personal conviction is, in the short term, basically we are overestimating the impact of AI, and in the long run, I think we are underestimating it. And I think that's true, like, for most technologies when you look at it.
Thank you for the talk. I have a question to Michael. What are the biggest challenges you're facing right now in DQC?
Yeah, I think it's balancing essentially the experimentation of developing the product further, of taking it from a V0.9 to a V1. So where we try to stay innovative compared to making sure that everything is stable. And that's really like the challenge because, for instance, we have one part of the solution where we thought like we have this great redesign and we improved a couple of features. Then we just deployed it, and like a couple of hours later, a client called us and said like, okay, like why is everything looking different? And yeah, it looks nice, but why weren't we informed beforehand? And I think it's like the typical pain that you experience as a startup, where at the beginning you are just super happy and you ship everything, and now suddenly you have to make sure that people that were early adopters, that you continue to have them on the journey. Because for them it's like crazy to see that 3 months later, features are working like much better, everything looks a bit different, and the speed at which you are working is completely different to all the other tools that they are using. So for us, the challenge is basically getting new customers and not losing the old ones due to the speed at which we are working. So the scale-up phase is like super hard, and it's completely different compared to the kind of challenge we had a year ago.
I don't know if you guys have read a book called Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore. Okay, so I would really recommend you read the book. So this is the way technology gets adopted. This is a sort, this famous bell-shaped curve where you see people who are visionaries, early adopters, visionary, and so on. When you move to a situation where you're no longer working with guys which are early adopters, you have in a way to try to say, now I want to move from one-off type of cases into something which is more generic. And usually this is where you have in a way to stop listening as much to the people which were the visionaries. But this is also where the fact of working on specific segments means also working with parties like you guys, which can deliver the whole product and the whole value. So this is a very significant change, and startup which can really do this, I think, and I'm glad to hear this because we hadn't discussed this. It's a sign of your evolution towards from a series of one-off of high quality into something which is that you got something which is becoming much more productized and now can scale. So well, good.
Any more questions here? Yes.
Hi, I have one question regarding the approach to find anomalies, because as I understood it, you're basically feeding in the data and then your model finds out what's strange. If the data is kind of broken from the beginning, isn't that then kind of the same thing as garbage in, garbage out again?
Yeah, so there are two things. I mean, in the ideal world, we are basically getting data where someone says, okay, this I have cleaned manually, and this basically contains errors. So that's the perfect world, but that's not like how people want to use our tool. And therefore, we have to propose or basically deduct how we think a column behaves or a table behaves, and then give this to a human and say, look, this is the rule that we are proposing. This is basically the pattern we have identified. In 98% of the cases, you have maybe like in this column 2 letters and then 8 digits. But then in 2% of the cases, you have deviations. And do you want to basically establish this as the norm, that it's always 2 letters and 8 digits? And then the human says like, yeah, that's a rule. So it's basically, at the beginning, very easy, like outlier detection, but also like inconsistencies in formats, this kind of stuff. And then having this human confirmation, because no one wants to fully automate this part.
Okay, so basically for every rule you think you found out, then it's manually checked.
Exactly, unless someone says like, okay, I like flying autopilot, and hopefully I don't crash.
Okay, thank you.
By the way, what he would like to use that you do a pilot with his product.
Sorry to just dig a little bit deeper, then I do not understand what's the difference between rule-based engine and your product.
Yeah, at the end of the day, like a lot of things are simply rule-based, but then we also do like inter-column dependencies, and then you become much faster if you don't try to do this rule-based. So there are certain parts where we do like simple rule-based stuff as well. And then like if you try to add more columns and say like, okay, if this happens in column A, if this happens in column B, then basically you become much faster if you do machine learning. Plus, you try to also get this feedback loop, because a lot of times we observe that data is changing over months or over years, and therefore like try to adapt the rules based on like human interactions or based on what we observe in the data. And then it makes sense to use machine learning as well. But like some part of our stuff is of course also rule-based, and that part is essentially what clients expect us to use at the beginning, and the ML piece is where we wow them.
Okay, seems there's not too many more questions, so then we shouldn't make everybody wait longer for lunch. Thank you very much again for the interesting talk. Now before... Go ahead.